Hey everybody, Victor here again. Welcome back to another episode of Need Some Introduction. Apologies for my voice. I have a bit of a cold I'm getting over, which is part of the reason I didn't get that second episode that I was planning to get out last week, along with the Halloween holiday, of course. Always takes up a lot of family time. For today's episode, mostly talk about Succession. We start off with a conversation between me and Sona, where we discuss last week's episode of Succession, the second episode of season 3, as well as we talk completely spoiler-free about the show You on Netflix. She's watched all of it. She binged third season, and I have seen none of it, so I'm trying to get her to convince me to watch the show. And I will probably, based on our conversation, I will probably be sampling season 1 this week and see how far I get into it. And then, about halfway through this episode, you can expect to hear my recap of season 3, episode 3 of Succession, The Disruption. So as always, make sure you subscribe so you know when our next episodes are available. Make sure you recommend us to any of your friends and family. We'd love to get more listeners. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And as always, drop us a line at needsomeintroduction@gmail.com. If you have any questions or any comments, we'll include it in the show in the future. With that out of the way, let's get into the episode. All right, to start things off, Sona has been watching You. Season 3 just came out on Netflix. And for anybody who's not aware, You was on Lifetime, I believe. I might be wrong about.
No, I think that's right.
Is that right? So it was on Lifetime, I think, and it came out. It had a lot of positive reviews in season 1, and really nobody watched it. I think I read an article about this. Oh, you watched it on Lifetime originally?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm surprised because I assumed you had watched it on Netflix because maybe You're not aware of this either. But that show came out, got very good reviews, and I think that they were averaging per episode 800,000 viewers, right? And then this was right around the time, I guess, when The Tiger King was blowing up on Netflix. Netflix picked up You, and You was in limbo as to whether there would be a second season or not for a Lifetime because it had not really done very well. And Netflix, with this amazing match algorithm to put people in front of the right audience, the first week that You was on, they got 30 million people to watch the show. And recently, when they were talking about Squid Game being the biggest show on Netflix history, by the way, 139 million people watched Squid Game in the first month it was on, which is astounding. By far the most popular thing they've ever had. They published the top 10 shows they'd ever had. And like the first season of You eventually had like 70 something million viewers. And then the second season had even more viewers, right? So a huge phenomena on Netflix, right? One of their most popular shows of all times. Two things that are interesting there to me is this failed show on cable that gets acquired by Netflix, and then Netflix is able to just kind of streamline it to the people who, are going to respond to it, and it becomes a phenomenon, right? All that being said, I didn't watch it on Lifetime. I didn't watch it on Netflix. My wife has seen the first 2 seasons, but I still have not watched any of it. So we're not going to do any spoilers. Sona, pitch to me why you were a fan of the show from the very beginning and why I should watch it.
Okay, so to be clear, it's 3 seasons now, right?
Yes,
and I just finished yesterday. What caught me the first time was it had a really great ad campaign for season 1. There were commercials that were really compelling, like literally, I think the commercials were on during Good Morning America, maybe. So I'd be getting ready for work, and I would actually, it would catch my attention enough that I would stop getting ready for work and watch the commercial. So very compelling commercials. Then I think I read a couple of reviews of it or at least saw the headlines for the reviews saying it was good. So I don't think I ever knew when it was on live. I think I watched it on demand. Mm-hmm. And that way I was also able to watch 2 or 3 episodes at a time, maybe. But this show stars Penn Badgley, who I think might have been in Gossip Girl or something like that. I'm not sure. But he is very charismatic. He's very fun to watch. The show has a very Dexter-like feel to it. And as we discussed, I was a big fan of Dexter, even though in retrospect, I'm not sure why, because it seems like only the first season was good. But and that John Lithgow season. But it had that feel. So that sucked me in. It had the main character is a narrator. So you have the insight into what he's thinking and what's driving him and why he's doing what he's doing. Same idea of Dexter of a main character with a dark childhood that has really scarred him. And now he's doing these things because, all of that trauma is compelling him in a very unhealthy way. But at the same time, very charismatic. So as much as the things that he's doing, which are generally choosing a target of obsession and then stalking that person, a woman, manipulating them into having a romantic relationship and idealizing them into a place, on a pedestal they'll never be able to live up to, and the inevitable fall from that. You watch all of that, it's terribly unhealthy and awful and even criminal. And there are crimes that occur in connection with this obsessive stalking. He is still so charismatic that a small part of you is rooting for him in a very sick, twisted way, even though what he's doing is terrible. And I feel like all of the characters are generally decently well developed. There are some antagonists to him that, some of them are objectively terrible people. Some of them are just people that are in the way of him obsessing on this person. It's just a really fun show to watch. And it's also very darkly funny. And I love that kind of like dark comedy aspect to it as well. I have really enjoyed it. Certainly there are plot holes. There are things that are not realistic. There are part of what is driving him is a type of misogyny, which, of course, is something that to me is very disturbing, but nonetheless fascinating as well, to get that insight into what he's thinking and how he's justifying it to himself and how he sees himself as like a white knight that is saving these women from like a terrible fate. All of it really interesting to watch and very entertaining to watch for me.
Hearing you describe this makes me think of a bunch of things. Dexter's one of them, obviously, but more so is, did you ever see, remember Terry O'Quinn? Did you used to watch Lost, right? Did you watch Lost?
Yep.
Terry O'Quinn, who's plays Locke, yes. So Terry O'Quinn was in a series of 80s slasher movies, although only the first one was good. It was called The Stepfather. Did you ever see that one?
I think I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Basically, in that movie, it is this guy who, in the very first scene, this is not a spoiler, it's the first scene in the movie, you see him like getting all dressed up for work, and he puts on a tie, and he's very formal with it. And as he walks out of the house, you realize like everybody in the house is dead. He's like murdered the whole family.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And the basic premise is that he is, for whatever trauma he had at his youth, he's trying to create this idealized, perfect family. So he like woos this mother, like a divorcee, and he like plays this part to insinuate himself into this supposedly idealized family. And of course, the family disappoints him eventually, and he has to murder them all. And that's his, like,
no other choice.
What else could you do, right? So it's like, so when you're describing this to me, I think of that, some of that dynamic.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing it makes me think about is the talented Mr. Ripley, or the Ripley character themselves, who's like an imposter, right, within like another group, who's also like kind of not so much the movie. I'm not a huge fan. I mean, it's beautiful, that movie, the recent version of this, but they really should rediscover that book, because I think that movie kind of only accentuated certain aspects of the story. Mm-hmm. I really like the book in that you're in the mind of this total sociopath, and he is like a complete empty vessel. Like he is only like reflecting what other people want, and that's why he's good at winning them over, but he himself is like empty. There's nothing interesting about him internally, which I guess is different than what you're describing, because there's a true charisma to this character,
for sure.
But it did make me think about that, given that I like the Ripley books and I like the first Stepfather movie. The rest of them are pretty horrible. The first one's actually very interesting because you really get into his psychology, and Terry O'Quinn gives a great performance, and I like all those things. So maybe I should watch this show. I
honestly find it just really entertaining. Like, listen, if you're looking for something like that's really a bulletproof plot, or, something like that. Yeah, there are definitely holes here. But like, if you're willing to go along for the ride, it is very entertaining. And this last season, very interesting commentary, I think, on growing up and having a family and the things that you do for your children that sometimes make you feel like you're just like on the hamster wheel every single day and getting nowhere. And the trade-off you make of what is fulfilling for you versus the life that you want your children to have. Like, there is some deeper stuff going on about family dynamics, relationship dynamics, the compromises we make for somebody else. Very interesting, I feel. Like, nothing that is earth-shattering, nothing that's not been said before, but like interesting to see in this context. It definitely a unique way of presenting those dilemmas in the context of an obsessive stalker.
Exactly, a sociopath. But but aren't we all sociopaths at heart?
In some way.
Oh, so did you finish season 3? Have you finished it?
I did. I finished it yesterday.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep.
So the question I had for you was, once again, have not seen anything, not even one episode of the show. Mm-hmm. Oh, and I got to tell you something about Dexter too. But anyway, not having seen anything about the show, I was just for this conversation, just doing a little bit of research about it. And what I noticed recently was the season 3 critics giving it very high grades, even higher, I think, than the first 2 seasons. And it was already a
Yeah,
very
I could
well
see that.
respected. So, but here's my question to you. And now that you finished the season, audience score and the critics score for season 1, season 2, both very strong. Critics score even stronger for season 3. Audience score a little bit weaker. And I looked at some of the negative comments, and people are not happy, at least a subset of these fans are not happy with the direction the story went in. Do you, like, without spoiling anything, do you know why there's kind of a backlash?
Yeah, I have some ideas about it. I think without spoilers,
Are they trying to make him sympathetic? It seems like that is part of the criticism.
you know what? I think people do feel that they are trying to make him sympathetic when he has done these inexcusable things. However, to me, because this is all told from his perspective, I don't see it as trying to make him sympathetic. I see it as like a psychopath explaining how he rationalizes these things to himself.
Right. Right.
Does that make any sense?
Right. Yeah.
Like, I don't take it as an objective. That narration isn't objectively true. That narration is how he is justifying his own actions to himself. And to me, that's interesting and fascinating.
Yeah. You know what? I think, rather than, I was going to have you like spoil everything for me in this conversation, but maybe I will at least try season 1, just like over the course of the week, just sample the first few episodes.
Yeah, I would love that.
Yeah. And then I could start talking to you about it as well. And then maybe over, the next month or two, as we talk about these other things, I might catch up on it and we can keep talking about it.
Yeah, I personally think season 2 is the weakest. I'm not sure how I would rank 1 and 3, but I like both 1 and 3 better than 2.
You see, that's interesting to hear you say, because Kim started watching it when season 2 came out, and she binged season 1 like really fast, and she doesn't binge anything. She binged it really fast. She loved it. And then at the end of season 2, I remember her telling me, like, she's like, I don't know if I'm going to watch season 3. So maybe she kind of had a bad aftertaste at the end of season 2.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely held my interest season 2. I think I binged season 2 over a weekend though. So like, it only really had to hold my interest for those couple days. You know what I mean? Like, on the one hand, binging requires you to hold your interest. On the other hand, I think it says a lot when you return to a show week after week that you could easily step away from. I'm not sure if I would have stepped away from season 2 or not. Season 3, I think, it had that social commentary about like family life, and they're not quite middle-aged, but kind of that feeling that you get in middle-aged life, which I found interesting. As over the top as a lot of this show is, I feel like season 3 like went off the rails, but in a fun way, like in a zany, as much as violent crimes can be zany. Season 3 kind of went off the rails in a zany way. That again, like, I'm just willing to go along for the ride and suspend my disbelief. So
was it like only murders in the suburbs or something?
Not quite, but there's a character in season 3 who just does not seem to be able to control their impulses in a way that, like, realistically, I mean, it's just completely off the rails. So,
we'll leave that for another conversation then.
Yes. I'm trying not to spoil anything. So
the Dexter thing I wanted to recommend to you. I just found it this week, totally by accident. A guy who writes reviews for Rolling Stone magazine called Alan Steppenwall. And I had no idea that he had his own podcast. So he was a guest on someone else's podcast, and he pitched that there was a whole season of his first podcast, and now the second season was coming on. And his podcast is called Too Long Didn't Watch, right? And the premise of the show, I haven't listened to all of it, but I cherry picked, and you'll see why I cherry picked certain shows. He has a celebrity come on and they're like, I never saw Lost, or I never saw Mad Men, or whatever. Right. And for example, he has like John Hamm come on. He says, I never saw Gossip Girl. Right. So what they do is he makes them watch the very first episode and then basically say, based on that episode, what do you think happens in the show? And then the very last episode of the show. So only the first and last episode. And that is it. Right.
That is Joel's preferred way to watch TV. Just so you know. He'll be like, sure, I want to watch that. Let's watch the first episode and the last episode of every season. And I'm like, that's not what I want to do.
Which I think is a terrible, but by the way, this is the first episode and last episode of the show. So I think it's a terrible way to watch a show.
That's really crazy. At least Joel will take it to a season. Yeah.
But what I wanted to recommend in this, like I said, I've only listened to a few of them because I think this is actually not a good way. So if I don't think it's going to be an entertaining conversation, I don't listen to it. But I, just discovered it last week. And of course, the very, very first episode I listened to was the most recent episode they had, which is like a year old at this point, but is the most recent one before the season 2, which was Paul Scheer, the comedian and actor, watching Dexter. And the reason I'm going to include the link in our show notes, and I'm going to send you the link so you can listen to it at your leisure. It's so funny to hear him watch the first episode and be like, oh, I'm hooked now, right? And then see the last episode and be like, how the hell? It goes, and he's literally in his mind, he's like saying, okay, like in season 3, Deb has to find out that he's the killer and blah, 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 blah. And he's like writing this whole story in his head. And then he's like in the last episode. And then you have to see like, then the host, Alan Steppenwall, he goes in and he fills in the blanks and he gives him like a quiz going like, which one of these things do you think happened in season 2 and season 3, right?
That's hysterical.
And hearing his reaction to like these plot points, like, Deb's in love with him and he's like, what the hell are you talking about? It is so funny. And the last reason I wanted to bring it up is that after he gives him the whole recap of the show, that Paul Scheer goes, so it sounds like this show had 2 good seasons. And Alan Steppenwall goes, yes, season 1 and season 4. Alan Steppenwall, he agrees with me. He thought it was season 1, season 2, and season 4. But basically, Paul Scheer, in hearing it, goes, so you're saying there's 2 good seasons. And then at the end, they go, is this a good way to listen to watch the show? And he's like, it definitely is, because you just saved me a lot of time.
It's so funny.
Yeah. So anyway, it was actually a strange parallel that we had recorded that. And like a week later, I found this episode and I'm like, yep, they pretty much agree with everything we said.
That's really funny. Well, we're in good company.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Maybe I'll do the same thing with you. And then you can do that to me.
Hey, there's an idea.
Maybe I could do Maybe I could do the Joel technique of first and last episode of each season. And then you can fill in the blanks for me. Maybe that's not a bad idea.
Okay. That's an idea. We could do that.
What time is it? Oh, what time is it?
All right, Sona. So you saw the second episode of
season
3 of Succession, which was, I'm pulling up my notes. It's the name of a mass, actually. It's called Mass in the Time of War, which is actually a mass written by Haydn. And I know nothing about it. I just looked it up because it was
than I know.
It was part of my recap. I was, I'm always curious to know, like, what does the title mean in context of the episode? Everything I know here about this mass is based on a Wikipedia reading because I know nothing about
it. So many things in life.
Exactly. Of course. All right. So how did you like this episode? What'd you think?
I enjoyed it. We recently were talking about how funny Greg's little comments are. And this episode starts out with a good one where he's like, I might have to be in front of Congress again. I'm too young to be in front of Congress this much.
It's true. That's true, actually.
Which I found very entertaining. This is the one, right, where Kendall is trying to kind of gather the troops to overthrow Dad. And he's making his strongest pitch to everyone. And everyone is seeing the pros and cons and trying to judge what's best for them personally and like make this decision in the moment. And everyone's like trying to scheme. I thought there was a lot of good, as there always is in the show, but like the sibling dynamics were really a center focus here.
When I was assembling last week's episode, we had our conversation and I had just edited that together. And then I did my recap of the, most recent episode, the one we're discussing right now. And I found it really funny that, you were talking about, I don't really like Shiv. And we were talking about the whole conversation about like, she thinks she's a good person. She doesn't really know herself. And then I found it very interesting that in this episode where Kendall basically says, you're not a good person. You think you're a good person. Right?
Yeah. And, he's telling her, come on, we all knew what was happening with this cruise ship situation. On some level, everyone knew. And she's just making excuse after excuse. I was 15. What did I know?
Right.
Well, you know what? Like at 15, you are able to recognize a creepy male. And she admits that much, right? But she didn't want to admit that she could imagine how that played out for other people besides her.
But I think that's a very interesting point you bring up, whether it's Me Too or just some of the kind of like this reckoning that's happening culturally. It's very easy to say, for example, what she says legitimately, a true, legitimate excuse to say, well, I couldn't change the machinations of the business. I was 15 years old. Absolutely legitimately true. But she can change her actions now. In other words, I'm off the hook for what happened 30 years ago. So therefore, I have no accountability for what continues to happen now, because that circumstance was created 25 years ago, right?
And she may not have known then, but if she didn't know, it's because at least at some point she chose to bury her head in the sand about it, right?
Right.
It was there to see. And that's what everyone is telling her, right? That like we all knew something was up. So at a certain point, like, the benefits you're getting and you purposefully choose to look away because you don't want to have to confront that. And I think that's her. She doesn't want to confront so much about her life and why she is who she is. And I think of all the siblings, she's the one, and I said this before, in the most denial about the benefits that her father has given her and being a part of that family has given her. And I believe in her head, she's created this idea that she has earned it all, and like, that's just not the way the world works. We all know this.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about her character there as well. And maybe more interesting than I gave credit to when we were discussing this earlier, is that I guess in a way we're touching on part of her basic psychology. To have this vision of herself, she needs to make all these excuses. So it makes her the most hypocritical, because the other, like Roman, for example, embraces who the dad is, embraces who the company is. And then it forces her to be a hypocrite, because she either says, I didn't know about that. And they're like, of course you knew about it. And she's like, oh, I knew about it, but I was like 15 years old. But now, like when she literally, met with one of those women who was making the accusations and tried to pressure her in the last season to not speak. It's like, you're fully aware of what you're doing now, right? Like, so you can't now say, I'm complicit today, but since this happened originally 25 years ago, I'm not complicit. It's like, wait a second, you're the one who's perpetuating it in the current context, right? So, and I think to your point, I think that is unfortunately a psychology that not only in business circumstances, which we hear about all the time, right? You hear about Elizabeth Holmes and how she basically everybody was trying to massage the business because it was what she had requested. And then she simultaneously, and this what happened with Enron also, right? Where she's simultaneously saying like, well, I thought the information they were feeding me, which I was requesting, like, make it look right. And then you fed that back to me and I'm like, okay, I believe this. So it's like, you can't request a result and then force everybody to give you that result. And then when you get the result back going like, well, it's the only thing I knew.
It's your fault. Yeah.
Exactly, right? It's like a very strange feedback loop. And by the way, I in one of the earlier episodes of this recap show, I was mentioning analogs in the real world, obviously Rupert Murdoch and his family most directly. But of course, I think Shiv's strongest correlation into real world is Ivana Trump. Right? In the fact that once again, she's kind of like this, she's a liberal, she raises money for liberal causes, but then it's just like, but all this stuff is happening under your watch and you make excuses for it.
I'm sorry, Ivana or Ivanka?
Ivanka, I forgot. Ivanka, right? Ivanka is the daughter, right?
Yes.
Yes, Ivanka, I meant Ivanka.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. Okay.
I don't know enough. I couldn't remember which was which. So I think
I'll
Ivanka
agree
is kind
with you as long as we're talking about Ivanka. I'll agree with you.
Yes, Ivanka. Yeah, I meant to say.
Yvonne has been through some crap, I feel.
Yes, she has. But I think that she's like apolitical as far as like, her politics are what gives me the most benefit at this moment. So So in a way, she's maybe a little bit like Marsha. Is it Marsha or Masha, by the way? Because he calls her Masha.
Oh, I've always thought it was Marsha. I don't know.
Now it's the same thing that happened in Nine Perfect Strangers, right? By the way, so I couldn't remember. It's those Australians with their accents. I can't figure it out.
Well, Marsha or whoever she may be is not to be messed with, right? That's another thing that came out here. I think we already knew she was pretty shrewd. And I do think there is an emotional part of this. I do think she cares for Logan. But she knows her worth and she's not going to shortchange herself. And I give her credit for that.
I thought that was great. That whole sequence where she knows how to manipulate him, right? She's there massaging his shoulders. She knows he's in a point of weakness. I mean, I think the only time I have ever seen him apologize to anyone in this entire show, and of all the people, he's apologizing to the sibling that probably respects the least. He's basically apologizing to him right on the phone because he feels like maybe he's the only one that he might still be able to win over. So she sees him at his weakest and then she comes in. And of course, she's out there soothing his ego, and he comes back with a lot more confidence when he comes back to the US again. And meanwhile, the lawyer's in the other room. She's not there. She's just like, this isn't my thing. But the lawyer's there cutting a very sweet deal for her and her daughter.
Yeah.
So
And good for her.
the way I described it was that it feels like you're watching the early moves in the chess. You're putting your pieces on the board where you have multiple positions of power. You're seeing like, well, what's that person's angle? Like when they move a pawn to a certain position, they're like, so what's the play there, right? And I find that very funny because everybody is afraid of Logan. So everybody's just trying to get a little bit more power. Like I liked the Roman Jerry dynamic because her and Roman together would have a little bit more. Everybody's just angling for a tiny bit more, a little bit bigger piece of the pie, right?
Well, except for Kendall, who's trying to take the whole thing.
Well, Kendall. Well, that's what Kendall keeps saying. I think that's what's interesting about that. The dynamic in that episode is that Kendall's saying like, we need to get to 51% basically to flip this thing over, right? And he's like saying, with the family behind me, and then like, with Stewie and Sandy buying shares from like the market, and simultaneously you assume that there's all this bad blood between Logan and Greg's grandfather, right? So potentially like all these guys together, if they all come together, they can flip this thing over, right? But they all have to work as one, right? And like any fracture in that, it doesn't work. Literally in this episode, you see all those different components, but they're all kind of on a different page right now. So getting them all to be on the same page at this point seems pretty unlikely.
Yes. And meanwhile, let's just note that Kendall is continually blowing off his lawyer pleading with him to prep so that he doesn't end up in jail. So,
Right.
I mean, that just seems like, I know there is a lot going on, but maybe prioritize being prepped for the FBI that could come busting in at any moment and all of that. He seems to maybe be losing the forest from the trees a little bit.
Yeah, but for me, the best part of that whole show, I mean, of course, was just having the four siblings, which I don't think we've ever had that kind of scene where we have all four siblings in the same room at the same time. I guess we have it at Shiv's wedding, but
yeah, I was about to say that. Yeah,
but not like in this way. And you see all that animosity playing out, right? You see Kendall has really not thought this out very well, by the way. Like the pitch he's making for them is so all over the place. Some of those bullet points he's making is resonating with different family members. Like, so you could see he like has Alan Ruck on his side. I keep calling him by the actor's name.
Connor,
yes. So he's got Connor on his side at one point. He's got Roman on his side a little bit. Roman's just always, making these little snide asides, but Roman's always kind of on the same
I think
wavelength.
he is swaying everyone a little bit until the donuts.
Oh, the donuts.
Dun, dun, dun.
I like how Connor, by the way, is so disturbed by the arrival of the donuts that he can't even take his eyes off of them. But he also really wants to eat one of them.
Poisoned or not?
But he also wants to eat them too. He's just like, he's got it, he's ready to eat it. So Kendall's annoyed that he's trying to eat the donuts, and then they're thinking about whether they could be poisoned or not. And then of course they're thinking like, here's Dad looming again in the background that he knows we're here together. He knows
all.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's like he's a ghost or something.
And then they all just got pushed back into their place.
What's interesting about it is that there is something, they make the argument that this could potentially like kill their dad. He's so cold-blooded in most of his portrayal that it's easy to see him as almost like, unstoppable, like a Michael Myers, right? That's talking about the Halloween movie that's here recently, but it's like literally just like an unstoppable killing machine. Like it's easy to see him that way. But at the same time, we see him in this episode and he really does look very weakened. I can imagine that, like, let's say he really did lose the business and he did lose the family. I think he would like degrade very quickly.
He may. I mean, I honestly don't even think Logan is the most unlikable person on this show. So
we know who the
yes, we're aware. I don't know. I think, listen, he makes some bad decisions and he is unsympathetic in many ways, but at the same time, I don't know. I wouldn't feel bad if they took him down, but I don't feel like I think it's more, to me, compelling the risk of losing everything because of this proxy battle. So what are we going to do to not lose the proxy battle? I see it more, I'm more interested in it that way than in a way of Dad must be stopped.
To your point, when you think about Logan and really the analog to it in the real world, like Fox News, basically, you can see that these people making like very selfish decisions have cultural impact, so that's the negative side of it.
Yeah.
But like you said, from a Logan perspective, I think what's interesting about it is that he is, I mean, and Kendall calls it out, right? He's a dinosaur, right? But like that type of leadership, that type of CEO was the way businesses ran for decades and decades, right?
Yeah.
And he's been really successful, like making a direct correlation to the Murdoch, the Fox News, Fox Empire, Wall Street Journal, and all the tabloids, etc., the News Corps, to make a direct correlation to that. I guess it was the first episode before he had the stroke. Kendall's telling him like, this business is going down in flames. You're going in the wrong direction. And he directly says, when I bought the movie studio, they said, and this is 20th Century Fox, right? In the real world, the movies are going away. When I started the network, everybody says no one's doing network TV anymore. And of course, that was Fox, right? Which at the time everybody laughed at. They're like, who wants another? Like the three networks aren't even doing great. Now we're gonna have a fourth network. Who the hell cares? And of course, like The Simpsons, Married with Children, etc., it becomes a huge success, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, he's like saying, yes, everybody says you're old media, nobody cares. And I'm right every single time. And then afterwards, they explain to me why I was right or why I was wrong, right? So he's somewhat sympathetic, is because I think like we know people, our parents and our, people of that generation who make these same arguments all the time, going like, yeah, you guys think you know everything. And that's the tension. Are they wrong? Like, is the world actually changing? Or is that just like, and he'll say, the world's not actually changing. It's just new messaging. Everything else is exactly the same, right? So, and that is the cultural tension in the show. And like, that's the cultural tension in the world right now, for real, right? No, that's actually what's happening.
Right.
So I don't feel like Logan is that despicable, because he's basically just the type of leader that was successful a generation ago. And he continues to be that person, right?
Exactly. And yes, he is having that difficulty of relinquishing power to his kids. And listen, they're not perfect. So you could see why he would have issues with that as well. Far from a perfect dad. I'm not saying that at all, but he has provided for them. He does protect them to the extent that he can. Yes, he was willing to let Kendall go to jail. So that's on the negative side.
Right.
That's a black mark. But, I'm just saying, I don't think he's like the big bad evil, that's all. Right.
I mean, honestly, that's what's interesting about the show. I don't see anybody as the villain here. He obviously is villainous in the fact that one, I mean, he's done some irredeemable things on the show, but they all have. But
all have.
But he has the most power. He has, the most chips, and he has used that position to bully everybody, including his kids. Like, I think to myself, I called it out in the previous recap, how evil that is, in a way that he is this older guy. He's the actor, Brian Cox is almost 80, but I think the character is supposed to be in his 80s, right? Rupert Murdoch is in his 90s, right? I mean, not that it's a direct parallel, but I think he's supposed to be in his 80s based on like some of this biography we find out about him. So you think to yourself, here's a guy that basically, if this went to court, by the time this finished, he would probably be in his mid to late 80s, and he would probably just like be under house arrest or something. And he's like, no, I'm going to throw my son, who is like, has, a young family and everything. I'm going to throw him under the bus. That is pretty despicable, right? And I think that was a, like kind of a bridge too far for him.
No, it is easily the most terrible thing that I have seen him do on the show. And yes, it is completely irredeemable. I mean, on the other hand, I don't think he forced these kids to get involved in the business. He might have encouraged it, but they easily could have. They all are admitting that they saw the dark side of this growing up, and they know who their dad is, and they have endless resources. So they chose to kind of avail themselves of staying that close with their dad when they easily, I mean, Connor kind of not, right? But they do have the background, the funding, whatever, to go do whatever they want. Like the Shiv did for a little while, right? With the political consulting.
Right. But he mocked her for that. He mocked her for being in politics, right? And he was kept saying that she but that's what I think is the other.
It doesn't have to be politics. You have that kind of background. You can do whatever the hell you want, honestly.
Right. But you know what? But I that's where now I'm coming around to maybe making him more of a villain than I originally kind of gave him credit for, even though he's kind of like a sign of his times. He is basically telling the kids, he's first of all telling them that you guys can have this. You guys can have this position. I want one of you guys to have it. I don't want to give it to someone else. I want to give it to you. And then he's literally like, tearing open her shirt and pointing at his heart and going, but to take this, you need to take me out. You need to take me out, right? Like, you got to kill the king. He literally says it to Kendall. You're not a killer. Yes. And he says it to each one of them, that they are not ready. They have to be able to be murderers.
Yes.
To be, and like, if he's telling them you have to be a killer, who is he telling them to kill? And then when they come for him, he's like, how could you do this to me? It's such a perverse psychology. And it's so self-defeating. it's
It
so
is, and
self-defeating because what's he going to do? Like,
it is a twisted dynamic, but how many times have we known people in real life, okay, who are not nearly in this situation, okay? But you say, what is with this person? They have gotten so sucked into their childhood dynamic that they are choosing at this point. You don't have this excuse as an adult because my childhood was screwed up, blah, blah, blah.
right.
Go start another life somewhere else away from these people who made you miserable, right? Like, how many times have you known someone in real life that you've said that about?
Oh, absolutely. And I
Right?
think, yeah.
So
no,
same deal.
Yeah.
At a certain point, you're an adult. You see clearly how twisted it is. Either you're opting to stay in or you're going to just make it for yourself the way you want it to be.
We're circling back to what I think is universally compelling about the show. It is so niche, it's so specific, but what I think works in this show is this. Again, my parents are visiting here from Portugal. You know, they're here in the US right now. They have all these stories about friends who like scrimped and saved, and they bought land and they did all this stuff. And like now basically they're passing away, and they either have the next generation inheriting their homes and their properties, and now they're all at each other's throats. You know, they've lost everything that their parents acquired, and these siblings are all completely alienated from each other. Or the opposite, where the parents are like, you don't deserve this, and have like basically locked their family out of their possessions and stuff. And the reason I think this show, in a way, is very specific, this like kind of media empire, but I think it's universal, is because, like you said, I think where I'm now familiar with people in this generation, and this stuff at a much, much smaller level is happening all the time, where people are like trying to divvy up their parents' house, and then, you know, like arguing that, well, you know, I watched them for more years than you did or whatever, so I should get a bigger proportion of this.
That's my point, right? Yep. And then you roll your eyes and you're like, yep, you're an adult, get it together.
Right.
You know, and it's just micro level versus macro level. So like I have that same eye rolling thing of like, in some way you are choosing to let this dynamic continue.
Well, you're an only child, so you won't have to deal with these things. And
yes,
you have an only child, so he will be very lucky and not have to deal with these things either.
That is very true. We do have some complicated family dynamics, but I will not have to worry about any competitors to the estate.
But one day I could picture you when you're older. You'll put your arm on Oscar's shoulder and be like, son, you're not a killer. You don't deserve this. You don't deserve the keys to the castle.
Right now, I'm only quoting Bluey to him, but maybe one day
right.
I
maybe
will
one day.
quote Succession. Right now, I'm very into Run Your Own Race, actually. So
that's right. What else was there? The only criticism I have of this episode, by the way, is that I really liked all these interactions between the siblings, getting them all together.
Yeah,
it is my favorite version of this episode that we've seen. But at the same time, I have seen a version of this episode multiple times now, and I'm like, okay, we're good. I understand where everybody's coming from. I understand the stakes.
And I mean, this also gets into, right, like as far as time progression, we are just inching forward. I understand in real life, you probably would have these conversations over and over, but for a television show,
Right. And I also feel that, you know, on the realistic side of things, that this happens all the time, right? Where like a business is like, there's going to be a hostile takeover of company X, and it happens for a decade before it actually happens. So I know that happens, but like you said, from perspective of like drama,
entertainment,
not the. And I really
understand,
do feel, and I really do feel like it's almost like this was, you know, we've had a version of these conversations so many times. It's just getting it all out in the open so that this becomes like now where the whole show builds off of this moment. And I hope that's the case. And I do feel that that's the case, but I would be frustrated with the show if we get to the end of the season and it's like Logan's on top, Stewie and, you know, Sandy blew it with their hostile takeover. Kendall's on the bottom again. And the kids are either, you know, trying to win over the dad's attention and going off to other endeavors. And I'm like, all right, so we just rebooted this to the beginning of the whole show.
Yes.
I'm like, if that happened, I would be frustrated, but I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think that's what's going to actually happen. And I hope not anyway. Oh, so the last thing I want to mention about Greg was I was really impressed by how, once again, strangely savvy he is in that initial conversation with Tom. Tom's like trying to like put him, you know, his back against the ropes. And he is kind of doesn't know what to say. He doesn't want, he's kind of hinting that he is the source of the leak, but didn't really want to come out and say it. So he's kind of playing both sides. And then he kind of throws out there, And then almost accidentally, because once again, he maybe it's just the way Nicholas Braun plays these scenes. It's almost like he's almost accidentally finding his footing. He mentions, "Oh, by the way, Shiv is here," and immediately Tom is like, "Don't tell Logan.
Yes.
Don't tell Logan." So it's like he's diverted him from the conversation.
Yes.
So now he gets to like have the plausible deniability, and that's it. He like dodged a bullet, and he does it over and over again when the lawyer shows up at his apartment.
Yes, very street smart. Very street smart. Like, and he knows he needs a lawyer, but who's supposed to be the source of the lawyer, because it's going to be beholden to someone depending on where the lawyer comes from. Like, very street smart for a kid in his 20s.
And now you have him with his grandfather, right? And the grandfather's like basically with this like communist, economist, lawyer. Yes. So like they have their own agenda to like basically take the company down. Now Greg is under someone else's potential hold, but it's still smart, I think, for him to be out of like, the whole,
it's the
Kendall.
Best option. It's the best option. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cause you don't want Jerry telling you what to be. You don't want to be like basically at the whim of the corporation because they want to bury this whole thing. Yeah. And you don't want to be at the whim of each one of those individual siblings because they all have their own agenda, right? So it's like,
this is someone who will look out for his interest.
Yeah. Exactly. He has unique power outside of that dynamic, which I think is smart again. Yeah. Other than that, I thought there was some very, very funny dialogue sequences there. I love when, Kendall is talking about how like, this is the end of the great whites. This is the, he has all these different talking points, and Roman is just throwing one quip after another, saying like, doesn't he use that mouth better than a $20 whore? But then my favorite is like when Kendall goes, it's time for like, a new generation. And then Roman goes, what you mean? Like this bunch of, what do you call it? Multicultural trans 20 something dreamers.
Yes.
Which is true, right? Just like it's a bunch of middle-aged white people being like, it's time for change.
Yes. Very funny. Very self-aware. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a great. Roman got most of the great lines in this episode.
Yeah, I always enjoy that character. He's very self-aware among all of them.
I also like how he overvalues himself, but then he is very self-deprecating. I like when, to your point in the last week's episode when we recorded, you talked about how Roman has this kind of like good gut feelings, and Jerry says the same thing. She has a good. And she goes, you also have a really good feel for what's, happening like on the internet. And he's like, I Google every once in a while. As if like, and in a way, maybe it's like, that's all he's really doing. Cause like maybe the rest of the family is so inside their own bubble. They're like not aware of what's happening outside of them.
Yes, maybe. Well, just, as Greg reminded us, the internet is vast and it's not possible to read everything on it.
You can't read it all. It's very big. But the general sentiment seems to be good. So that gets us up to this current episode, and we'll see what happens tonight. If I get to watch it tonight because of all the Halloween stuff going on. Do you have any Halloween parties or anything you're going to?
Yeah, actually, in 20 minutes, we're heading out to a big event at the kids club. So
Nice.
We'll see how that goes.
All right, so I'll let you go. All right, Halloween beckons.
That's right, for both of us.
All right, very cool. And I will talk to you soon. You're gonna be watching. I'll be watching tonight, so we'll have to catch up.
I'm gonna try as long as I can stay awake.
That's right. Okay. All right. Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So that was my conversation with Sona, and I will be getting her feedback on this episode. Very curious, re-listening to that now, what she thinks about this current episode, given how many things kind of pay off in this very episode. But for now, it's just me giving you a recap of the current episode and my opinions on it.
Well, the government does have an unbelievable amount of leverage at its disposal, Dad. The law.
Yeah, the law. The law is people. And people is politics. And I can handle the people.
So, episode 3 is called The Disruption. And The Disruption, as far as what the title means, I always kind of try to figure out what does this title mean, if it has any kind of subtext. This one's pretty straightforward. Kendall is disrupting the way that the business is running, and there's a bigger disruption coming by the end of the episode. But The Disruption is the show that this character, new on the show, I believe, Sophie Awobi, is almost like a Colbert-like mocking of the political discourse. So maybe something that goes for a younger audience than like Colbert does, but very much in line with a leftist mocking of right-wing figures. All right, now I'm going to say this a whole bunch of times this episode. What an incredible job that Jeremy Strong is doing here. He's getting profiled for a magazine, and all of this is so cringy. He's obviously probably studied this menu before he came here. And he's even thinking about, what are they going to write about the way I ate my salad? Like, he's so overanalyzing everything. But just these little changes to his expression. Like, really, I love this kind of acting. In previous seasons, I've heard people really like give praise to his performance. And I've enjoyed the Kendall character. And I think he's done a good job. But maybe Kendall's been such a caricature that I thought, yeah, he's doing a good job. But I wasn't incredibly blown away with his performance. But I, more and more so, especially in this episode, I really cannot give enough praise to Jeremy Strong's performance here. And like I mentioned, just seeing him eat that salad and all the things that are going through his mind and how you can see it play out on his face. This confidence that he comes through, that and he's shifting, pivoting back and forth between this. He's confident. He knows what he's talking about. He has these really good talking points. And then all of a sudden he's scared again. He's retreating. He's worried about what are people going to say about him. So he says some things on background, obviously wanting them to get published without any kind of accreditation. But then the questions begin. The recording begins. The interview begins. And then the question comes up about the siblings. And you can see this is a sore spot. And of course, it always is on this show. From there, we move to the rest of the siblings circling around Logan. And they're having this meeting. And you see right away, Jerry makes a decision about this AI company in Israel. Logan wants the opposite decision. And they're deciding who do I listen to here? Who's actually in control here? And Logan's, of course, I am. But there's already this tension here. And you can see that Jerry has to put her foot down. Jerry's also just trying to keep the company operational. And I think the frustration is starting to get to her, especially towards the end of this episode. This is a really interesting scene by basically just seeing how all these dynamics play out. Just a couple of things to draw attention to. First of all, they're really, really afraid of Kendall coming in for the board members meeting. I also like the fact that they came up with a slogan for the town hall, which is "We get it." And I like how this gets spun by everybody about like we get it already. Stop complaining about the rapes. So everybody has like their own take on how that slogan might not be the best, but I guess they go with it anyway. And another thing maybe to draw attention to here is the fact that Logan wants the kids to kind of do some press to kind of counteract Kendall's press, to say like, oh, Logan's such a great dad. And the kids, they'll stand by dad, but not in public. They're like, we're not going to go in there and tell these stories. So Roman becomes the de facto representative for the family here. Oh, and one more thing to bring up is that Logan basically tells Shiv, you have to go and feel out Kendall. So they're going to some kind of event that night that Kendall's speaking at, and he asks her to go. So this is really interesting that we cut now to a scene where they're all in the limo together. Greg's there and Kendall's hangers on, mostly women. He's kind of having this ego inflating, surrounding himself with these women, which once again is good optics given the scandal, but also I think it is kind of something that he needs for his own ego stroking. And they're playing this game of good tweet, bad tweet. And this is Kendall, once again, just in a nutshell. It's amazing how he needs to like self-flatulate. He wants to hear those good tweets. You're doing the right thing. And then he wants to hear those bad tweets. You're betraying your dad. You're fake woke. You are clueless and privileged. And he wants to hear that. He needs to hear those insults. He needs it. I don't know why. It's very strange. I find his psychology really fascinating, especially in this episode. And man, talk about cringy. He is so cringy in general. Like we've seen him rap before. He's trying to be hip, and he does it so many times in this episode. But the whole thing when he's walking into this event and he goes, should we give him something? And he basically turns around and says like, F the patriarchy. And I'm like, wow, that's the cleverest thing you could come up with. All right. So as cringy as that is, then we have a really, really interesting scene. We see that Shiv is already there. Shiv is talking to Nate. By the way, that actor is now on, what's that show? He's playing the Landon character that from the Da Vinci Code spin-off TV series. What is that thing called? The Lost Symbol, maybe? Anyway, he's the star of that thing. So even though as busy as he is, he still pops up here. Once again, these people are more than happy to come back and do a little bit of work on Succession because I guess any opportunity to be in this show is kind of a gift to any of these actors. But I don't think he's just popping up for a second. We will see that Shiv and Tom have their issues, continuing to have their issues, and Nate is definitely there. I wouldn't be surprised if there's going to be some kind of hookup before the end of the season and some additional betrayal to Tom. We'll wait and see how that plays out. But he's definitely, I don't think he's just here just for this one scene. And they're talking, and she has some pretty good zingers about like, oh yeah, we have to talk about communism right away. But he's basically calling her out on being fake. This is the dynamic she's always had with him. And I think it's kind of what attracts her to this Nate character. But then Kendall shows up and Nate wanders off. But this is a really great scene. It's a continuation of Kendall getting that first dig on her last week where she said, you are not a good person. And he apologizes. So to that point, I mentioned in last week's recap where he doesn't have the emotional IQ to land these points that he's already scoring, like to close the deal with his siblings. And I think he acknowledges a little bit of it here. He kind of apologizes. Like, some of the things I said to you were a little hurtful. And her response to that is very boilerplate, like, you got to come back into the fold. It's better to work inside the system than outside the system. I'm trying to be a reformer, but I have to do it this way. And he kind of smirks at her in his mind. I think he's thinking, wow, this is a lot of stuff that I used to say. And he basically throws it at her, says, oh, this is you now. And he just walks away from her. I mean, well, he's being called onto the stage, but still, I think that walking away is almost like he's like, oh, I get it now.
Hey, I wanted to say, just at Rava's, I think I'm right. I am right, but I maybe threw a couple of ugly rocks.
Uh-huh.
I'm just trying to be more thoughtful now. So,
Look, I think we have the same aim here, is the truth. You know, big picture. I'm fucking tired of all this shit too. And I'm pushing for change. Like, is there a world where you stop being gross and throwing stones, and we can acknowledge and rebuild, you know, truth and reconciliation? You know, and maybe we can actually find a way to fucking fix things from the inside, which is the only place that anything ever gets done anyway.
they made you get all dressed up for this? Look at this. It's you now. I'm sorry for you, Siobhan.
Man who is used to owning the news rather than being in the news. Kendall Roy.
And I think he has the power in that moment, and it hurts her. She starts to question herself. I was critical last week of the fact that maybe we've seen that type of episode, what we saw last week, a little too many times, sibling dynamic, and then they all go back to Logan. But I think in a way, this becomes the mirror image to that episode. It becomes like a response to that episode, in that we now see the siblings back under the hold of Logan, but the seeds that were planted last week are eating away at them. They're like, they're sprouting, they're taking root, and they are leading to some of these questions in this episode. So, for example, Kendall and Shiv, their interaction, it hurts her again, even more deeply than last week. And then she goes back to talk to her dad, and she starts saying some of those things like, come on, Dad, you knew what was going on. Come on. If we knew what was going on, you had to know what was going on. And he has all these kind of excuses for what happened. But once again, it becomes like the mirror image. The things that Kendall quoted to them last week are now paying off this week.
I didn't know about any of this shit.
Well, you're on emails.
Do you know how many emails I get a day? I don't read my emails. I get the action points.
I know.
Shiv, the world is fucking rough. We ran a cruise line out of some tin pot ports registered in bongo hovels, and we poured millions in it. Sure, did we play rough with the odd fucking union boss or some moaning mini repeat litigant? I don't know. It was a quarter of a century ago. A lot of it. So yes, I fought for you and your brothers, but you will not find a piece of paper that makes you ashamed of me. Okay?
They are starting to have their doubts. If Kendall knew how successful he had been inadvertently or intentionally, but he may not be aware, he kind of walked out of that meeting thinking that he had failed, he may not have had such a meltdown that he will have over the course of this episode because he's kind of unaware that this is all happening behind closed doors. So Logan's trying to make this pitch, and Shiv's not really buying it. So there is a weakening there. Meanwhile, Kendall gets roasted again by Sophie Awobi, and he just puts it on the screen, and he just allows himself to be roasted because he wants to be the type of person who laughs along with this. Like, he's like, I get the joke. I'm in on it. I'm this type of person. You just don't know me, but that's not true. It's crazy. Like, he's just putting himself out there and getting, taking all these arrows. It's completely self-inflicted. It's amazing to me. It really is. Then we see one of the most interesting developments of this whole entire episode. We have Shiv going back home after confronting with her dad. First of all, the dog's called Mondale. I totally forgot about this. The dog's called Mondale. Just as far as like this faux liberal stance that they have, that the dog is called Mondale. And I totally forgotten about this. It's been around from the very beginning, but I just totally forgot about it until this moment. But it's just so strange that the dog is called Mondale. And of all the possible Democratic figures you try to, like you could call your dog Kennedy or something. I mean, if you wanted to just be stereotypical. But Mondale, of all people, Mondale, really? Okay. But much more importantly, in this scene, conversation she has with Tom, once again, I don't understand his game if he has one, but he's just like showing his belly again to her and saying, hey, I will take the punch. I will be the scapegoat for this whole entire thing. I ran the cruises. You can pin it all on me. I could probably cut a deal. I may not have to go to jail. And he starts off saying he may not go to jail. And then he's thinking like maybe only 1 year, in jail. It's amazing. But much more disturbing is that she's like, oh my goodness, Tom, you couldn't possibly do that. But maybe, you know what? And it will probably put you in Dad's good graces. I know that really matters to you. This is really, truly despicable behavior on her part for 2 reasons. She had already made the suggestion to her dad last season, and now he's offering himself up, and she is basically saying, oh, this is a good escape plan. I get off scot-free. The business continues as it is for the most part. Dad stays in power, and Tom is it's just horrible. Like this, I can't wait to talk to Sona about this because she has problems with Shiv. This does not speak well of her at all. Like really, really does not. But at the same time, you can't be in the lion's den. Once again, I just cannot stop making animal metaphors in my recaps, but you can't be in the lion's den and then, hang a stake around your neck. I guess that's the best metaphor I could come up with. But I mean, that's Tom, right? I mean, I don't understand. Like, what is his deal here? Some other things happen here. I don't know if I get the sequence correct. But one very funny thing, really, this is all Greg gets to do this episode, other than getting his office demoted by Tom, is the whole situation with the watch. Kendall says he's going to hook him up with the watch. He gets a watch, a very expensive watch, which he has to pay for. And he's basically shamed into paying for it because he doesn't really want to pay for it. It's $40,000 for the watch. He assumes that Kendall's going to get him that watch, going to pay for it. When he said, I'm going to hook you up, he didn't mean like I'm going to hook you up with a guy. He meant I'm going to hook you up, like pay for it. And this might backfire on Kendall, by the way. Of all the stupid decisions he makes, Greg still has the smoking gun, right? Greg has the gun with the fingerprints on it, and Kendall should respect it a little bit more. But Kendall has an overinflated view of his importance to this whole entire drama. And the smartest thing he could have done was to be like, you know what? I am going to buy you that watch. Meanwhile, Greg gets a demotion this week. Every recap so far this season, I've kind of been like, Greg's on point. Even in his own stupid, clumsy way, he's falling up every single time. And it's not just dumb luck. He's making those savvy decisions. So there's like as Sona says, he's pretty street smart. But he gets demoted this week. Well, like I said, he's the one with the smoking gun. He's the one who's got the fingerprints on the murder weapon in a bag somewhere. And he's getting pushed around. And he needs to be a little smarter in how he plays his cards. He doesn't think he's savvy. He's much savvier. He should trust his instincts, but he gets knocked down this week. He gets a demotion this week in my eyes. But Kendall, once again, gets beat up by this TV host, Sophia Woby, and he's laughing, but he's not laughing. His dings are really hitting him hard. He once again has this complete disparity between the cool, hip guy who's going to save the company, bring it into the next century, and the reality of being this scared little boy who needs his dad's approval. And that tension is always at play. And when she mocks him one more time, his response is to make the decision that indeed he is going to go to the town hall. He's going in, as they say, because he knows that's the one place where he can rock the boat. It's the one place where he can cause waves. Next thing that happens is we see that the president's spokesperson is on ATN, on the network. And as Logan's watching this, once again, what is up with Tom? Tom, again, makes the same offer he made to Shiv. Once again, showing his belly. And Logan says, oh, that won't be necessary. But thanks for that. Thanks for offering yourself up. And then McFadden, the actor, Matthew McFadden, playing Tom, has this ambiguous look on his face. But he immediately pulls out a slip of paper in his note out of his pocket and calls a lawyer. I don't think we've ever heard about this law firm or this specific lawyer, Rex. I wrote it down here. Rex Hendon. I don't think we've ever heard of this lawyer before. And what I'm curious about is who is that lawyer? Because I have a feeling, and I could be wrong, that he was testing the waters. He wanted to say, would Shiv have my back? Would Logan have my back? So maybe, because he had spoken to somebody, maybe he is looking out for himself, and this was a test. Maybe the lawyer told him, go to them and test this out. Are they willing to sacrifice you? If they're willing to sacrifice you, then you know that that is probably their play, and you need to protect yourself. I'm hoping that that's what's happening here, and that he's not calling someone up to basically make a statement and kind of take the bullet. I hope that's not the case, but who knows? I mean, Tom has proven himself to be a beta from top to bottom. So I don't know. I'm not sure. For someone that tall, he should be a little more confident in himself. And like I mentioned, Logan's looking on to this presidential spokesperson who's on the show, basically threatens her and threatens the president, I should say, via her. And this backfires, and we'll see by the end of the episode. But now they're prepping for the town hall. We already know Kendall's on his way over. He has informed Greg. And Greg, I assume this was intentional, that he knows Greg is going to leak that he's coming because he wants to get this panic going ahead of the town hall. But in the meantime, before they find out that he's showing up, I find it very funny that they're preparing for the town hall and there's the questions. Here's the questions that people offered up. And they're like, we don't like these questions. Why are people asking these questions? These questions make me uncomfortable. So I'm like, right, great. So that's a lot of transparency there at the organization. So they have their own questions that they're going to ask. But of course, they never get around to the questions because first they find out Kendall's coming. They try to keep him out of the building. All chaos breaks loose. They try to fire him immediately. Jerry, who's the only one who has her wits about her, warns them that there's repercussions, right? You can't just fire somebody when they are actually bringing charges against the company. It becomes, like she says specifically, ammunition for the DOJ. It just doesn't look good, right? That you fired him as an employee, can't attend the town hall. And even though he literally said earlier that he doesn't want to take down the company and he's not a suicide bomber, literally what he says to Shiv earlier in the episode, he, just from being mocked in public, he is very much concerned with saving face. Or in front of who? In front of the public? And I don't understand what his game is. On Twitter? He's trying to impress Twitter? I don't know. That's a fool's errand, by the way. But he does get into the building through the freight elevator. And I do find the fact he gets to his office, he's locked out of his, can't log into his account. And then I like how he's like saying that the temperature, they're messing with me. They changed the temperature in the room. This is definitely not 68, maybe 65, maybe 62. I like the fact that they would be so petty. They would just turn down his temperature by 4 or 5 degrees and that would be sufficient. But also interestingly here, they send a security guard and Kendall's like, can I help you with something? And he's like, just checking in. But very importantly, that security guard is the security guard that covered up the death earlier on. So very important that Logan is sending a message by sending that specific security guard to Kendall's office. But Kendall has a plan. It's surprising what a Sonos speaker with a Bluetooth connection can do to disrupt the town hall. And as Shiv is speaking, making her opening statement, all of a sudden we hear Rape Me by Nirvana playing on a speaker. And they can't even locate the speaker. We see it on camera that it's in the corner, like kind of tucked away, but it's blasting in the middle of the town hall. And they unplug the microphones. They're trying to desperately turn it off. And of course, this is a disaster, right? If you're not familiar with that Nirvana song, that it's like, am I the only one? It's kind of in a more, in a way, it kind of echoes what Kendall was saying to Shiv directly, saying that, am I the only one? Am I the only one who sees how bad this is, right? So that message is obviously Rape Me is just to embarrass the organization, but Am I the Only One, I think lyrically is directly speaking to Shiv, and it really, really gets under Shiv's skin. And she goes back into her office, and I don't know if this is an improv or not, but it was very good that she's trying to act nonchalant. She is looking at her appointment book for the day and spits into it. So, like I said, I don't know if that was an improv or not, but it is very potent to kind of see where her head was at that moment. And of course, Logan is there saying, do you see now? Not sure what that means, but I think that he's trying to tell her, he calls her Pinky. Logan is basically trying to say, this is your brother. This is why we have to fight. And I think this works for her as an argument. He's kind of always said that she's the closest to him. Maybe they are the two closest to each other. And that's why he's trying to kind of use this as an example of how everyone's out to get them. So it's this chip on their shoulders that they have, as entitled as they are. But once again, it's this very interesting psychology that they all share, that this is a business that employs thousands of people, that is seen, this network is seen by millions of people, that changes the political mood from day to day and has a lot of power. And the stories of this cover-up of peoples whose lives were destroyed by rapes and worse, but all of it in the end is just their personal drama. And in a way, maybe that is where Logan and Shiv are the most similar. All right, so now this all culminates on one night where Kendall has decided he's going to go on the show, The Disruption, rather than being mocked from afar. Terrible idea, by the way. And in parallel, it looks like Shiv and the siblings have gotten together, and Shiv is basically saying, I've written this press release. It kind of lays out everything. Almost everything, because there's one thing that's been left out, of course, the death of this waiter on her wedding day, who not everybody knows about this anyway. But other than that, it talks about Kendall's substance abuse problem, the issues he had in his marriage, the issues he had with his children. And once again, to that point, this is kind of a mirror image of last week. Yes, Roman and Connor were not willing to throw Logan under the bus and kind of and line up with Kendall. But equally, they are not willing to fully stab him in the back here either with this press release. But Shiv is so angry from what happened at the town hall that she releases it anyway. And now the press release is out. Kendall's about to do this show. And it is funny seeing Kendall in the green room getting ready to go on stage, that he still thinks this is all going to go well. There's a funny interchange where Greg doesn't understand that the watch is like self-winding, like, winds when you walk. So he suddenly, someone informs him of this because he thinks the watch is broken, and he starts to self-wind it, in a completely exaggerated way. But then the press release gets released, and all of a sudden his PR people are saying, you shouldn't do the show. And he's like, but I still got to go on, right? And they're like, you really can't do this. And then he's talking to the producer, and he's saying, you guys aren't going to talk about the press release. And they're like, of course we're going to talk about it. Everyone's going to be talking about it. We can't ignore it, right? So he doesn't know what to do. And this whole thing is so cringy because he had already tried to say, hey, I knew somebody who wrote for the Lampoon. I know this guy. He said you were really funny. He's trying to ingratiate himself with the writers. It's all so pathetic that someone with all this power and fame is like always looking for the approval of everybody. Like, it's crazy. It's his biggest flaw, I think. And as I was watching this, by the way, my heart's in my throat. I'm like, what is going to happen when he gets on stage? What is she going to do? What is Sophie going to do to him? This is going to be horrendous. And he basically, in line with his character, he makes this total non-commitment to go on stage. He goes, oh, well, I might not be able to because of legal. My lawyer might say I can't go on there. And instead of just saying, I'm not going to do it, I'm walking out, he just disappears into the IT closet. So, at that moment, nobody knows where he is, right? I'm sure there are still people in the green room. His entourage have no idea where he went. Jeremy Strong's face as he walks down that hallway and then disappears in that closet, like, wow, what great acting. When you think about the technical aspects of this, with a camera inches away from his face, great work on his part here. And there's that wounded boy again. I was really worried about him. I thought he might be suicidal at this point. Like, this episode was going in a very, very dark direction.
Oh my God, such sad news. Guess what? We're done again. And a pussy has ghosted my ass. Yeah, and I'm like heartbroken because I had so many names I was going to call him. Woke star Royko, Benedict Head Arnold, Paranoid Kendrick. But honestly, nothing could be as brutal as the open letter his own sister released. I am deeply concerned for the well-being of my brother. Our entire family has supported him through his many attempts at rehabilitation for his multiple addictions. But the events of the last days have made it clear that our hopes for his recovery were misplaced. I've now been a direct witness to his misogynistic rants and comparisons to world historical figures that were suggestive of grandiose and disordered thinking, and I would ask that people give my brother privacy and consideration during this difficult time. And that's from his sister, and she's the fucking nice one.
Meanwhile, back with Logan, I have a big question to ask Sona. The second question I'm going to ask her for our follow-up conversation is, does she still have that sympathy for Logan? She was talking about how Logan's kind of a dinosaur, but she doesn't really feel that he is malicious. He's just kind of like a sign of his times. He's like, basically, generationally, this is how you ran a business. This kind of attitude you had. But he might not be as conniving as he may appear to be. And I kind of supported that argument. And if you heard that conversation just earlier here, I did kind of second that opinion to a large extent. But I am curious to get her feedback on this specific conversation, because I find it very interesting that Logan is now talking to Roman, and Roman's the one who's gone out there and, said, I love my dad, because this is what no one else wanted to do it. He's the one who did it. And his dad mocks him for it. There is no sympathy here for Logan's position. And it's a real cruel, and then he's like, oh, I'm just kidding. Which of course it's always the way to sidestep the insult, basically. Oh, I'm just kidding. I can just picture that this is the dynamic they've had their whole entire lives. And then you see this is how Roman acts out too, right? Because Roman does similar type of thing where he just says some really offensive stuff. Oh, just kidding. And you see how he got this from his dad, but his dad still wounds him anyway. So we just see this, right? This intergenerational trauma again happening. And it's very interesting, by the way, that this fishing story isn't even real, right? This is something Connor took him fishing. So he didn't even have a real story to tell about his dad. That says a lot, I think. But then just as the press release is happening, just as Kendall's melting down, all of a sudden the FBI arrives at Royko's headquarters, and things get really ugly. And all of a sudden, just as I was worried, Kendall's on the ropes. Kendall's in a really bad spot. All of a sudden, he's watching on the phone that, wait a second, the FBI has arrived at Royco and is basically swarming the building.
Why don't we just ask them if they can come back tomorrow?
Logan, they are coming up. And if you don't open the door, they will kick it in. And if you don't open the filing cabinet, they will pull out a crowbar. This is a show of resolve. And there are cameras outside, and they do not need to see the FBI meeting any resistance.
What do we say?
Cooperate. Open up. Let them in. Let's go.
Okay, I will call down and I'll ask to talk to the lead agent and we'll work something out.
Okay.
We're cooperating.
We're cooperating.
And then there's another mirror image here. We have, just as we cut to black, the smirk on Kendall's face, which brings us back to the smirk on Logan's face when Kendall first had that press conference at the end of season 2. So just when he was at his lowest, he gets a little more wind in his sails. And now, what happens next week? In the previews, we see, hey, Adrian Brody has arrived, yet another big name to add to the cast. We'll see what role he's playing. And the father and son are going to meet on an island, some island somewhere, and we'll see what deal Logan is going to offer Kendall. And that'll be next week. And the episode is called Lion in the Meadow. And that's it. I hope everyone enjoyed this episode. I thought it was terrific. There was a real sense of suspense in that second half of the episode. And I can't wait to see where things go from here. Let me know what your thoughts. Send me an email, needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com. And some of those other episodes that I've recorded that I haven't had a chance to put out yet will be dropping later this week. You'll be hearing my Dune review, sneak peek. I was a big fan. I really liked Dune, but I have a lot to talk about the production of that and how they spent so much money on a movie that kind of is half a movie. Nonetheless, it's the best half a movie that it could have been. So I'll have that review out and some more bonus content as well later this week. Not sure what additional content I'll have with that, but if you subscribe to our feed, you will know when it becomes available. Anyway, talk to you soon. Bye-bye for now.